The desert doesn't forgive mistakes, and Clara Whitmore had made the biggest one of her life. Abandoned at a godforsaken stage stop, 8 months pregnant, with nothing but the dress on her back and the shame burning in her chest, she understood one truth. Out here, you either fight or you disappear. The man she'd trusted had left her like trash. The frontier didn't care about her tears. And when a quiet rancher named Ethan Hale offered her a deal that felt more like a last chance than mercy, she took it. Because survival isn't pretty, and neither was she anymore. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The stagecoach vanished into a cloud of dust and heat shimmer, leaving Clara Whitmore standing in the middle of nowhere with the sun beating down like a hammer on an anvil. Her back ached. Her feet throbbed in boots 2 sizes too small, borrowed from a woman in Tucson who'd pitied her enough to part with them, but not enough to ask questions. The weight of the child inside her pulled at everything, her spine, her resolve, the last threads of dignity she'd been clutching since St. Louis. The stage stop was barely worthy of the name. A sagging wooden structure with a roof that looked like it had given up years ago, a water trough green with algae, and a hitching post leaning at a drunken angle. No horses, no people. Just the relentless wind carrying dust and the faint, bitter smell of creosote. Clara pressed a hand to her lower back and surveyed the emptiness stretching in every direction. Flat, brown, endless, the kind of landscape that swallowed hope whole. "Damn you, Thomas," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Damn you straight to hell." Thomas Whitmore, her husband in name only, though the law and a preacher in a St. Louis chapel would disagree, had promised her California. Golden Hills, a fresh start. A life away from her father's debts and the whispers that followed her family like crows. He'd smiled that easy smile of his, the one that made lies sound like poetry, and told her he'd take care of everything. He'd taken care of it all right, taken her money, what little she'd saved, taken her reputation, gotten her with child, and then, somewhere between Santa Fe and this godforsaken stretch of Arizona territory, decided she was more trouble than she was worth. 2 mornings ago, he'd kissed her forehead, told her to wait at the stage stop, said he'd be back with supplies. She'd believed him because what choice did she have? But when the stage came through yesterday, the driver said he'd seen a man matching Thomas's description heading west on a fast horse, alone, with saddlebags that looked heavy. "Sorry, ma'am," the driver had said, not meeting her eyes. "Happens more than you'd think out here." The stage had moved on, and here she was. Clara walked slowly toward the building, each step deliberate. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the air was stifling, thick with the smell of old sweat and tobacco. A bench lined one wall. A pot-bellied stove sat cold in the corner. Dust motes swirled in the light, slanting through gaps in the boards. She sank onto the bench and let out a breath that turned into something dangerously close to a sob. Her hand moved to her belly, feeling the child shift and press against her ribs. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'm so sorry I brought you into this." The baby kicked, hard. Clara closed her eyes. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she couldn't afford to rest. She had no money, no food. The canteen she'd been carrying was nearly empty, and the water in the trough outside looked like it would kill her faster than thirst. She needed a plan, but every plan required resources she didn't have and a future she couldn't see. The sound of hoofbeats jolted her upright. She moved to the door, heart hammering. A rider was approaching from the east, silhouetted against the brutal glare of the afternoon sun. For one wild, stupid moment, she thought it might be Thomas, that he'd come back, that there'd been some mistake, that he'd gather her up and apologize and they'd laugh about this someday. But as the rider drew closer, she saw it wasn't Thomas. This man was broader, older, with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low and a mustache that gave his face a grim, weathered look. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who knew this land and respected it enough not to rush. He slowed as he reached the stage stop, his gaze sweeping over the place before settling on Clara. His expression didn't change, didn't soften or harden, just remained carefully neutral. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Sir?" Clara stepped out into the sun, squinting up at him. He was maybe 40, maybe older. Hard to tell with men out here. The desert aged them fast. "You waitin' on the eastbound?" he asked. "No. Westbound came through yesterday." "I know." He studied her for a long moment. His eyes were gray, sharp, and they took in everything, her swollen belly, her worn dress, the faint tremor in her hands. You got people nearby? Clara lifted her chin. I'm managing. That wasn't what I asked. I don't see how it's your concern. The man dismounted with a grunt, pulling a canteen from his saddle. He uncorked it and took a long drink, then held it out to her. You look half dead. Drink. Pride told her to refuse. Thirst told her to shut up and take the damn canteen. Thirst won. She drank carefully, rationing the water even though she wanted to gulp it down. When she handed it back, he nodded. Name's Ethan Hale, he said. Got a ranch about 8 miles north. Clara Whitmore. You from back east? St. Louis. Long way from home. I don't have a home. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't press. Instead, he glanced at the stage stop, then back at her. How long you been here? Since yesterday. You got food? She hesitated, then shook her head. Water? Not anymore. Ethan sighed, the sound heavy with something that might have been frustration or resignation. You can't stay here, Mrs. Whitmore. You'll be dead in 2 days. I'm aware of that. So what's your plan? Clara met his gaze squarely. I'm still working on it. He almost smiled. Almost. You got grit, I'll give you that. But grit won't keep you alive out here. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. I need help at the ranch. My wife passed last winter. Left me with 3 kids and a house that's falling apart faster than I can fix it. You look like you could use work and a roof. I could use an extra pair of hands. Clara blinked. You're offering me a job? More like a bargain. You help with the house and the kids. I give you shelter and food. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm pregnant. I noticed. I'll have a baby in a month, maybe less. I've got 3 already. 1 more won't make much difference. The bluntness of it should have offended her. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to her in months. No false sympathy, no prying questions, just a straightforward transaction. Why would you help me? She asked. Ethan looked out of the desert, his expression unreadable. Because my wife would have wanted me to, and because leaving you here would make me the kind of man I don't want to be. He turned back to her. But don't mistake this for charity. You'll work. It'll be hard, and if you can't pull your weight, you'll need to find somewhere else. Claire's throat tightened. I can work. Then get your things. I don't have things. Ethan's expression flickered, something that might have been pity, quickly suppressed. Then let's go. He helped her onto his horse, his grip firm but impersonal, and swung up behind her. The ride north was silent except for the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hooves on hard-packed earth. Clara tried not to lean back against him, tried to hold herself upright despite the exhaustion weighing her down. But eventually her body betrayed her and she sagged slightly. Ethan didn't comment. The ranch appeared gradually, rising out of the flat expanse like a mirage solidifying. It was bigger than she'd expected. A main house, a barn, a scatter of outbuildings, and corrals holding a few horses and cattle. But everything looked tired. Fences sagged, paint peeled. The garden was a tangle of weeds. A girl of about 10 stood on the porch, shading her eyes against the sun. She was thin, with dark braids and a suspicious expression. "Who's that?" she called out. "Her name's Clara," Ethan said, dismounting and then helping Clara down. "She's going to be helping around the house for a while." "Why?" "Because I said so, Emma." The girl, Emma, crossed her arms. "Mama wouldn't like it." Ethan's face went hard. "Your mama's dead, Emma, and I'm doing the best I can." Emma flinched but didn't back down. She glared at Clara like this was somehow her fault, then turned and stomped into the house. "Don't mind her," Ethan said quietly. "She's been angry since her mother passed. Takes it out on everyone." "I understand," Clara said, though she wasn't sure she did. She'd never had a mother to lose. Hers had died when Clara was too young to remember, and she couldn't imagine what it felt like to have that kind of grief eating at you. Ethan led her inside. The house was dim and cool after the glare outside, but it smelled like dust and neglect. Dishes were piled in the basin. Clothes were heaped in a corner. A pot sat on the stove with something crusty and unidentifiable stuck to the bottom. "I know it's a mess," Ethan said, sounding almost apologetic. "I've been trying to keep up, but between the ranch and the kids, it's fine," Claire said. though it wasn't. It was overwhelming, but overwhelming was better than dying alone at a stage stop. A small boy, maybe 5 or 6, peered around the corner of a doorway. He had Ethan's gray eyes and a serious expression that looked out of place on such a young face. "That's James," Ethan said. "And the baby's Lily. She's 2. Emma's watching her." As if on cue, a wail erupted from somewhere deeper in the house. James disappeared, and a moment later Emma emerged carrying a squirming toddler with red cheeks and tear-streaked face. "She won't stop crying," Emma said accusingly. Ethan took Lily, bouncing her awkwardly. "She's probably hungry. There's bread in the—" "The bread's moldy," Emma interrupted. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Then I'll ride to town tomorrow and get supplies." Clara watched this exchange with growing clarity. These people were drowning. Ethan was doing his best, but his best wasn't enough. The children were floundering without a mother. The house was falling apart. And now she was here, another burden added to the pile. Except she didn't have to be a burden. "Let me see her," Clara said. Ethan looked surprised, but handed Lily over. The little girl stopped crying almost immediately, staring up at Clara with wet eyes and a trembling bottom lip. "Hello, sweetheart," Clara murmured, settling Lily on her hip despite the awkward weight of her own belly. "You're hungry, aren't you?" Lily stuck her thumb in her mouth and nodded. Clara turned to Emma. "Show me where you keep the food." Emma's suspicious expression deepened. "Why should I?" "Because your sister is hungry, and I'm going to fix that." For a moment, Emma looked like she might argue. Then she shrugged and led Clara to the pantry. It was a disaster. Flour spilling from a torn sack, beans scattered on the shelves, a jar of preserves with the lid half off, attracting ants. But there was enough to work with. Clara found some cornmeal, a few eggs that looked reasonably fresh, and a jar of honey. "Get me a bowl and a pan," she told Emma. "I'm not your servant." "No, but you don't want your sister to starve, do you?" Emma scowled but fetched the items. Clara set Lily down. The toddler immediately plopped onto the floor and watched with wide eyes, and got to work. Her hands moved automatically, measuring and mixing. Within 20 minutes, she had cornbread baking and eggs scrambling. Ethan appeared in the doorway, looking bemused. "You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," Clara said. "We had a deal. I'm holding up my end." Dinner was quiet, but less tense than it might have been. Emma still glared, but she ate 3 pieces of cornbread. James ate without speaking, sneaking glances at Clara when he thought she wasn't looking. Lily made a mess, but seemed happy for the first time since Clara had arrived. Afterward, Ethan showed Clara to a small room off the kitchen. It had a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the barn. "It's not much," he said. "It's more than I had this morning." He nodded. "There's a well out back, water's good, and there's—" He hesitated. "If you need anything, just ask." "I will." Ethan lingered in the doorway for a moment, as if there was something else he wanted to say. Then he just nodded again and left. Clara sat on the bed, which creaked under her weight. Through the thin walls, she could hear the murmur of Ethan's voice as he put the children to bed, the creak of floorboards, the settling of the house. She placed both hands on her belly and felt the baby move. "We're going to be all right," she whispered. "I don't know how yet, but we're going to survive this." The baby kicked, as if in agreement. The first week was brutal. Clara woke before dawn, not by choice, but because her back hurt too much to sleep and Lily started crying at first light. She hauled water from the well, scrubbed dishes, swept floors, and tried to bring order to a house that seemed determined to resist her. Emma made everything harder. She criticized every meal, pointed out every spot Clara missed while cleaning, and made it clear that she resented Clara's presence. James was easier, quiet and watchful, but not openly hostile. Lily, bless her, seemed to have decided Clara was an acceptable substitute for whatever comfort she'd lost when her mother died. Ethan was gone most days, working the ranch. When he was around, he was polite but distant. He thanked her for meals, nodded at the improvements she made to the house, and kept his distance. Clara appreciated that. The last thing she needed was complications. But the work was relentless. Her body ached constantly. The baby pressed on her lungs, making it hard to breathe. Her ankles swelled, and the heat, Lord, the heat, was like nothing she'd experienced in St. Louis. It was dry and oppressive, baking the life out of everything. On the 8th day, she was hanging laundry when the first contraction hit. It wasn't strong, just a tightening, a reminder that her time was coming. She braced herself against the clothesline and breathed through it. When it passed, she went back to work. By afternoon, the contractions were regular. By evening, she couldn't hide them anymore. Emma found her bent over the kitchen table, gripping the edge hard enough to make her knuckles white. "What's wrong with you?" Emma demanded. "Nothing," Clara gasped. "Where's your father?" "Out checking fences. Won't be back until dark." Another contraction rolled through her, stronger this time. Clara bit down on a cry. Emma's eyes widened. "Is it the baby?" "Yes." "What do I do?" Clara forced herself upright. "Get me to my room, then boil water and find clean towels." "I don't know how to—" "Emma!" Clara grabbed the girl's shoulder, probably harder than she should have. "I need you. Can you do this?" Emma's face was pale, but she nodded. The next hours were a blur of pain and effort. Emma brought water and towels, her hands shaking but her jaw set with determination. James appeared at some point, wide-eyed and scared, but Emma sent him away to watch Lily. Clara labored alone except for a 10-year-old girl who was trying desperately to be brave. When Ethan finally came home, it was over. He found Emma sitting on the floor outside Clara's room, her dress stained and her face streaked with tears. "What happened?" he asked, alarm sharp in his voice. "The baby came," Emma said. Her voice wobbled. "I tried to help, but I didn't know what to do, and—" Ethan knelt beside her. "Is Clara all right?" "I think so. She's been quiet for a while." Ethan pushed the door open slowly. Clara lay on the bed, pale and exhausted, with a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the clean towels cradled against her chest. She looked up when he entered, her eyes shadowed but clear. "It's a girl," she said softly. Ethan approached carefully, as if he might spook her. He looked down at this baby, impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and Clara's delicate features. "She's—" He seemed at a loss for words. "She's beautiful." "She's alive," Clara corrected. "That's enough." Ethan glanced at Emma, who was hovering in the doorway. "You did good, Emma." Emma's expression crumpled, and suddenly she was crying. Not angry tears, but something deeper and rawer. Ethan pulled her into a hug, and she clung to him like a much younger child. Clara watched them and felt something shift in her chest. These people were broken, so was she. But maybe, just maybe, broken people could help each other stay upright. Recovery was slow. Clara had given birth before. Well, no, she hadn't, but her body knew what to do even if she didn't. And she'd heard enough stories from other women to know that this was normal. The exhaustion, the soreness, the overwhelming sense of being utterly spent. But there was no time to rest. Lily still needed tending, meals still needed cooking, the house still needed managing. So Clara did what she'd always done. She pushed through. Emma was different after the birth. Not warm, that would be asking too much, but less hostile. She helped with the baby without being asked, bringing Clara water and holding the infant when Clara needed both hands for something else. It wasn't friendship, but it was progress. "What's her name?" Emma asked one evening as Clara nursed the baby by lamplight. Clara looked down at the tiny face, still trying to wrap her mind around the fact that she was a mother now. "I haven't decided. Mama always said you should name a baby something strong, something that'll protect them." "What was your mother's name?" "Sarah?" Emma's voice softened. "Sarah Ann Hale. That's a good name. She was a good person." Emma paused. "Better than me." Clara looked up, startled. "What makes you say that?" "I've been mean to you. Mama wouldn't have liked that." "You were protecting your family," Clara said gently. "That's not mean. That's loyal." Emma's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I miss her." "I know, sweetheart." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the baby's soft suckling and the creak of the house settling. "I think I'll name her Hope," Clara said finally. Emma considered this. "Hope Whitmore?" Clara's stomach twisted. Whitmore. Thomas's name. The name of a man who'd abandoned her, but what choice did she have? The baby was his, legally, if not in any way that mattered. "Yes," she said, hating how the lie tasted. "Hope Whitmore." But even as she said it, She knew it wasn't the whole truth. This baby was hers, only hers, and she'd be damned if Thomas ever got to claim her. Spring turned to summer. The days stretched long and hot, and the ranch demanded constant attention. Clara found her rhythm, learning to balance caring for Hope with managing the household. She baked bread, mended clothes, weeded the garden, and slowly brought order to the chaos. Ethan remained distant but fair. He provided what she needed: food, safety, a place to stay, and in return she gave him a home that functioned. It was transactional, yes, but it worked. One evening in late June, as Clara was putting Hope down for the night, she heard raised voices from the main room. Emma and Ethan were arguing. "She's not Mama," Emma shouted. "I know that," Ethan said, his voice strained with patience. "Then why are you letting her take over everything?" "Emma, she's not taking over. She's helping." "Mama didn't need help." There was a long silence. Then Ethan spoke, quieter now. "Your mama was stronger than anyone I've ever known. But she's gone, Emma, and we can't keep living like this, barely holding on. Claire's made things better. You know she has." "I don't care," Emma said, but there was less conviction in it now. "Yes, you do. You're just scared. And that's all right. I'm scared too." Clara heard footsteps, then the sound of Emma crying. She closed her eyes and held Hope a little tighter. She wasn't trying to replace Sarah. She couldn't even if she wanted to. But Emma was right to be wary. Clara was changing things, whether she meant to or not. And change, especially in a house still grieving, was dangerous. It was July when the letter arrived. Ethan came back from town with supplies and a grim expression. He found Clara in the kitchen, kneading dough for supper. "This came for you," he said, holding out an envelope. Clara's hands stilled. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, and controlled. Her heart sank. "How did he know I was here?" she asked, not taking the letter. "I don't know. Maybe someone at the stage stop talked." Ethan set the envelope on the table. "You don't have to read it," but she did. She wiped her hands on her apron and picked it up, breaking the seal with trembling fingers. The letter was short. "Clara, I know where you are. I'm coming to collect what's mine, you and the child. I made a mistake leaving you, but I'm ready to make things right. Be prepared to leave with me when I arrive. Your husband, Thomas Whitmore." Clara read it twice, her chest tightening with each word. Make things right. As if abandoning her pregnant at a stage stop was just a simple error in judgment. As if she was property he'd misplaced and now wanted back. "What does it say?" Ethan asked. Clara handed him the letter without speaking. She watched his face as he read, saw his jaw tighten and his eyes go hard. "He's not taking you," Ethan said flatly. "He's my husband. Legally, he has every right." "The hell he does. He abandoned you. The law doesn't care about that." Ethan crumpled the letter in his fist. "Then we'll make sure the law doesn't get involved." Clara shook her head. "You don't understand. He's convincing, charming. He'll make everyone believe his version, and even if they don't, he's still my husband. I have no grounds for divorce, no proof of abandonment that a court would accept." "So what do you want to do?" It was the first time he'd asked her that. Not what she should do or what made sense, but what she wanted. And Clara realized with sudden clarity that what she wanted was to stay. Here, on this broken-down ranch with these grieving children and this stoic man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. But wanting wasn't enough. "I don't know," she admitted. Ethan studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "There might be a way." "What way?" "Marry me." Clara blinked. "What?" "Not for real," he said quickly. "But legally. If we're married, Thomas has no claim on you. You'd be protected." "That's insane." "Is it? You need protection. I need help raising my kids. We're already living under the same roof. This just makes it official." He paused. "And it solves your problem." Clara's mind raced. It was absurd, reckless, and yet... "What about Hope?" she asked. "Thomas will still claim her." "Then we say she's mine. Who's going to prove otherwise?" "Ethan, you can't just..." "Why not? I've got 3 kids already. One more makes sense. And if we're married when she was born..." He shrugged. "Doesn't matter what the truth is. Matters what we say." Clara sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. This was madness, but it was also the first real solution anyone had offered her. What do you get out of this? She asked. A wife. On paper, at least. Someone to help with the kids and the house, and maybe, he hesitated, maybe a little less loneliness. The honesty of it took her breath away. I won't love you, she said. I can't. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to survive, and to help me and my kids do the same. Clara looked down at her hands, still dusty with flour. These hands had scrubbed floors, changed diapers, kneaded bread, held a newborn. They'd worked harder in the past 2 months than in her entire life before, and they'd made something here. Not happiness, maybe, but stability, purpose. If Thomas took her back, all of that would disappear. She'd be trapped again, property instead of a person. All right, she said quietly. I'll marry you. Ethan nodded, as if she'd just agreed to mend a fence instead of upending both their lives. I'll ride to town tomorrow and make arrangements. Ethan, he paused. Thank you. His expression softened slightly. Don't thank me yet. This might be the worst decision either of us ever makes. But Clara didn't think so. Desperate, yes. Unconventional, absolutely. But not wrong. Sometimes survival required bold choices. And Clara Whitmore, soon to be Clara Hale, was done being a victim. The town clerk's office smelled like old paper and tobacco. Clara stood beside Ethan in her best dress, which wasn't saying much since it was the same worn calico she'd arrived in, hastily mended and pressed, and listened to a balding man with spectacles drone through the marriage ceremony as if he were reading a grocery list. Do you, Ethan James Hale, take this woman? Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, willing them to be still. This was practical, strategic, nothing more. Yet standing here, speaking vows that were meant to bind two people together for life, felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Ethan's voice was steady when he said, I do. The clerk turned to her. And do you, Clara Margaret Whitmore, take this man? She thought of Thomas, of his charming smile and empty promises, of the stage stop and the desert sun, and the way he'd looked at her that last morning, like she was something he could simply leave behind. I do, she said, and meant it more than she'd meant anything she'd said to Thomas. The clerk had them sign the register. Ethan's handwriting was surprisingly neat, each letter carefully formed. Clara's signature trembled slightly, but she got through it. The clerk stamped the document with bureaucratic finality. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Hale. That'll be $2. Ethan paid, and they walked out into the harsh midday sun as husband and wife. The wagon ride back to the ranch was quiet. Clara held hope against her chest, the baby sleeping peacefully despite the jostling. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, his jaw set in that way she'd come to recognize meant he was thinking hard about something. You all right? He asked finally. I should be asking you that. You just married a woman you barely know. I know you well enough. You work hard, you care about my kids, you don't complain. He glanced at her. That's more than most people get before they marry. Clara almost smiled. That's a low bar. Maybe, but it's an honest one. They lapsed back into silence. After a while, Ethan said, We'll need to tell the children. How do you think they'll take it? Emma will be angry. James won't say much, but he'll worry. Lily's too young to understand. And Hope, Clara looked down at her daughter's small face. She'll grow up thinking you're her father. I will be her father, in every way that matters. The certainty in his voice made Clara's throat tighten. Why are you doing this, Ethan? Really? It can't just be for help around the house. Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, My wife, Sarah, she believed in doing right by people, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. He paused. I failed her in a lot of ways before she died. I was so busy with the ranch, I didn't see how sick she was getting until it was too late. This, helping you, it's something she would have done without thinking twice, so I guess I'm doing it for her. And maybe a little bit for me, too, to prove I'm not as selfish as I feel most days. Clara didn't know what to say to that kind of raw honesty, so she reached over and briefly touched his arm. He didn't pull away. When they arrived at the ranch, Emma was on the porch with a broom, sweeping dust that would just blow back tomorrow. She stopped when she saw them, her eyes narrowing. Where did you go? She demanded. Ethan climbed down and helped Clara from the wagon. We need to talk. Get your brother. Emma's suspicion deepened, but she went inside. A moment later, she emerged with James trailing behind her. Lily toddled out, too, making a beeline for Ethan's legs. Ethan picked up Lily and took a breath. Clara and I got married this morning. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's face went white, then red. You what? We got married. She's your stepmother now. No. Emma shook her head violently. No, you can't. You didn't. Emma, I know this is hard, but you replaced Mama. The words came out as a scream. You said nobody could replace her, and now you married her. She pointed at Clara like she was something diseased. I didn't replace your mother, Ethan said, his voice strained. Nobody could do that, but I don't care what we needed. I hate you. Emma turned and ran into the house. The slam of her bedroom door echoed across the yard. James stood very still, his gray eyes enormous in his pale face. Is Miss Clara going to leave now? The question was so quiet Clara almost didn't hear it. She knelt down, careful of Hope in her arms, and met his gaze. No, sweetheart. I'm staying. I promise. People always say that, then they leave anyway. The simple, devastating truth of it hit Clara square in the chest. I know, but I mean it. This is my home now. Your home is my home. James studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. It wasn't acceptance, exactly, but it was something. That night, Clara lay in her small room, which was still her room because she and Ethan hadn't discussed the sleeping arrangements, and she wasn't about to bring it up, and listened to Emma crying through the walls. The sound was muffled but persistent, broken occasionally by hiccuping sobs. Clara wanted to go to her, to explain that this marriage wasn't what Emma thought it was, that it was just a legal protection, that her father's love for her mother hadn't diminished. But she suspected that would only make things worse. Emma needed to grieve in her own way, and right now that grief looked like rage. So Clara stayed where she was, holding Hope and wondering if they'd made a terrible mistake. The next few days were tense. Emma refused to speak to either of them, communicating only through slamming doors and hostile glares. She did her chores with an angry efficiency that somehow made the whole house feel colder. James watched everything with worried eyes but said nothing. Lily, blissfully unaware of the drama, continued to toddle around demanding hugs from anyone within reach. Clara tried to give Emma space while still managing the household. She cooked meals that Emma barely touched. She washed clothes that Emma threw on the floor instead of putting away. She endured the silent treatment with as much grace as she could muster. Ethan, for his part, looked increasingly exhausted. He worked longer hours on the ranch, coming home after dark and leaving before dawn. Clara suspected he was avoiding the tension in the house. She couldn't blame him. On the fourth day after the wedding, Clara was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, and her blood turned to ice. Thomas Whitmore rode into the yard like he owned the place. He was as handsome as she remembered, dark hair, easy smile, the kind of face that made people trust him even when they shouldn't. He wore a clean shirt and new boots, and his horse was well-fed and groomed. Clearly, whatever money troubles he'd claimed to have back in St. Louis had been resolved. Or maybe they'd never existed in the first place. "Clara," he said, dismounting with practiced ease. "There you are." Clara stood slowly, her heart hammering. "Thomas? You look well. Country life agrees with you." His eyes traveled to Hope, who was napping in a basket nearby. "And I see you had the baby. A girl." "Yes. She's beautiful, takes after her mother." He smiled that charming smile. "I've come to take you home, Clara, both of you. I know I made mistakes, but I'm ready to make amends. We're a family." Clara's hands clenched at her sides. "We're not a family. You abandoned me. I made an error in judgment, but I'm here now, aren't I? Ready to do right by you and our daughter. Her name is Hope, and she's not your daughter anymore." Thomas's smile faltered. "What are you talking about? Of course I'm married, Thomas, to Ethan Hale. He's Hope's father now, legally and in every other way." For a moment, Thomas just stared at her. Then he laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "You married some rancher in 2 months?" "Yes." "Clara, be reasonable. You can't just—" "I can, and I did. The marriage is legal. You have no claim on me or my daughter." Thomas's expression hardened. The charm dropped away like a mask, revealing something colder underneath. "You think I'm going to let you make a fool of me? I'm your husband, Clara, the real one. Whatever backwater arrangement you've made here doesn't change that." "Actually, it does." Ethan's voice came from behind Clara. She turned to see him standing at the edge of the garden, his rifle held loosely in one hand, not pointed at Thomas, but definitely present. "Clara and I were married 4 days ago. It's registered with the county. Legal and binding." Thomas sized up Ethan, clearly calculating his options. "You can't have known her more than a few weeks. Long enough to know she's a good woman who deserves better than being left at a stage stop." "That was a misunderstanding. I came back for her, didn't I?" 2 months later, after she'd nearly died, after she'd had your child alone. Ethan's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "You don't get to call that a misunderstanding and expect everyone to pretend it was fine." Thomas turned back to Clara. "You're really going to do this? Stay with this stranger instead of coming home with your husband?" Clara met his eyes without flinching. "You stopped being my husband the moment you rode away. I'm Clara Hale now, and I'm asking you to leave." "The child is mine." "No," Ethan said. "She's mine. I was here when she was born. I've been caring for her since. You weren't. That makes her mine." "That's not how the law works." "Maybe not, but we're a long way from anyone who cares about the technicalities." Ethan shifted the rifle slightly, still not threatening, but definitely noticeable. "I think it's time for you to go." Thomas looked between them, his jaw tight with barely suppressed anger. "This isn't over, Clara. That's my child, and I have rights." "You gave up your rights when you abandoned her," Clara said. "Now, leave, please." For a moment, she thought he might argue further. Then he swung back onto his horse, his movement sharp with frustration. "You'll regret this, both of you." He rode off in a cloud of dust, and Clara's legs gave out. She sank to the ground, shaking. Ethan was beside her in an instant, the rifle set aside, his hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" "I don't know." She pressed her hands to her face. "He's right. He could cause problems. Go to the law, claim—" "He won't." "How do you know?" "Because men like him don't want the trouble. He came here expecting you to fall into line. When you didn't, he got angry. But he's not going to waste time and money fighting a legal battle over a child he didn't want in the first place." Ethan's hand tightened briefly on her shoulder. "He'll move on to the next easy target." Clara wanted to believe him, but the fear sat heavy in her stomach, cold and insistent. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every sound made her think Thomas had come back. Every creak of the house settling made her heart race. Finally, she gave up and went to the kitchen to heat some milk. She found Ethan sitting at the table in the dark. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "No." Clara lit a lamp and set about making the milk. The domestic routine was soothing. Pour, heat, stir, simple tasks with predictable results. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I brought this trouble to your door. You brought help to my house and care to my children. Thomas Whitmore is just a complication. We'll handle it. You have a lot of faith in we." Ethan looked at her, his expression serious. "We're married, Clara. For whatever reasons, however it came about, we're in this together now. That means your troubles are my troubles." "That seems like a bad deal for you." "Maybe, but it's the deal we made." He paused. "Besides, I meant what I said out there. Hope is my daughter now. I don't take that lightly." Clara set the warm milk in front of him and poured a cup for herself. They sat in companionable silence, the lamplight pushing back the darkness. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "Sure. Why did you really marry me? And don't say it was just for Sarah. There's more to it than that." Ethan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "After Sarah died, the house felt dead too. The kids were grieving, I was grieving, and everything just stopped. We went through the motions, but we weren't really living. Then you showed up, pregnant and desperate, and you should have been just another burden. But you weren't. You brought the house back to life. You made it feel like a home again instead of a tomb." He looked at her. "I married you because I was selfish, because I didn't want to lose that." The honesty of it stole Clara's breath. "That's not selfish, that's human." "Maybe, but it still feels like I'm using you." "We're using each other," Clara said gently. That was the agreement, and there's nothing wrong with that. Ethan's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. You're an unusual woman, Clara Hale. I'll take that as a compliment. This time he did smile, and Clara felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not love. She'd meant it when she said she couldn't give him that. But maybe something like friendship, or partnership, or just the simple comfort of not being alone. The trouble came 2 weeks later. Clara was in town picking up supplies when she overheard two women talking near the general store. Did you hear about Ethan Hale? Married that woman barely 2 months after she showed up. The pregnant one? Scandalous. Though I suppose he needed help with those poor motherless children. Still, marrying her so quickly, and her with a baby that couldn't possibly be his, makes you wonder. Clara's face burned, but she kept walking. Let them talk. She'd faced worse than gossip, but when she got to the store, the clerk's wife, a pinched-faced woman named Mrs. Garrison, was there, and her expression made it clear the gossip had already spread. Mrs. Hale, she said, the name dripping with false sweetness. How lovely to see you. And your baby. Though I must say she looks awfully dark-haired for a Hale child. They're usually fair, aren't they? Clara met her gaze steadily. She takes after my side of the family. Of course, though one does wonder about the timing. You arrived pregnant and married Mr. Hale so quickly. Some might think, I don't care what some might think, Clara said. My husband and I know the truth. That's all that matters. Mrs. Garrison's smile turned brittle. Well, I suppose that's all that can be said on the matter. Clara gathered her supplies and left, but the encounter left her rattled. She'd expected judgment, but having it delivered so directly, so publicly, was different than imagining it. When she got home, Emma was waiting on the porch, her expression stormy. People at the store were talking, Emma said without preamble, about you, about Papa, saying you trapped him. Clara set down the supplies. And what do you think? I think, Emma's voice cracked, I think you did trap him. You needed help and you used him, and now everyone in town thinks, Emma. Clara kept her voice gentle. I know you're angry. You have every right to be, but your father made his own choice. Nobody trapped him into anything. Then why did he marry you? Why you and not… She stopped, tears spilling over. Why couldn't Mama have lived? And there it was, the real question underneath all the anger and resentment. Clara moved slowly, giving Emma time to pull away if she wanted to. But the girl didn't move, and Clara gently pulled her into a hug. Emma resisted for a moment, then collapsed against her, sobbing. I miss her so much, Emma cried, and everyone keeps saying I should be grateful Papa remarried, that we need a mother, but I don't want a new mother. I want Mama back. I know, sweetheart, I know. But Clara held her while she cried, stroking her hair. I'm not trying to replace your mother. I could never do that. She'll always be your mama, and that's how it should be. Then what are you? I'm just Clara, someone who's trying to help, someone who cares about you and your brothers and sister. She pulled back to look Emma in the eyes. And someone who needs you to give me a chance. I know it's hard, but we're family now, whether we planned it or not. And family takes care of each other. Emma wiped her eyes. Mrs. Garrison said Hope isn't Papa's real daughter. Hope is exactly who she needs to be. Your sister, my daughter, your father's daughter in all the ways that count. Clara's voice was firm. Don't let small-minded people tell you otherwise. Emma nodded slowly. She didn't smile, but some of the hostility had drained from her expression. I'll try. To give you a chance. That's all I'm asking. That evening, Ethan found Clara in the kitchen preparing supper. She told him about the encounter with Mrs. Garrison and Emma's tears afterward. I knew there'd be talk, Ethan said, but I didn't think about how it would affect Emma. She's protective of you and still grieving her mother. It makes her vulnerable to what people say. I'll speak with her. I think she's starting to understand. She just needs time. Ethan nodded, then hesitated. Clara, if the gossip gets worse, if it makes things too difficult for you, it won't. I've survived worse than wagging tongues. She turned to face him. We made a choice. A good one, I think. I'm not going to let a few bitter women make me regret it. Something in Ethan's expression softened. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met. I'm not strong. I'm just stubborn. Sometimes that's the same thing. Over the following weeks, Clara noticed a shift. Emma was less hostile, helping more with the children without being asked. James started talking to her more, sharing small observations about his day. Even Lily seemed more settled, as if she could sense the tension easing. The house began to feel less like a collection of wounded people coexisting and more like an actual family. One evening, Clara was putting Hope to bed when Emma appeared in the doorway. "Can I hold her?" Emma asked. Clara blinked, surprised. "Of course." Emma sat in the rocking chair and took Hope carefully, cradling her with surprising gentleness. The baby blinked up at her with dark eyes, then yawned. "She's getting bigger," Emma said. "She is, growing like a weed." "Mama used to say that about me." Emma's voice was soft. "She kept all these clothes from when I was a baby, said she'd save them for the next one. But then Lily came and Mama got sick and—" She stopped, swallowing hard. Clara sat on the edge of the bed. "Would you want Hope to wear them? The clothes your mother saved?" Emma looked up, her eyes bright. "Really? If you think your mother would have wanted that." "She would have. Mama never liked to waste anything, and she—" Emma's voice broke. "She would have liked you, I think. You work hard like she did, and you care about us even though you don't have to." Clara's throat tightened. "Thank you, Emma. That means more than you know." They sat together in the quiet, the baby dozing between them, and for the first time since Clara had arrived, she felt like she might actually belong here. But peace, she was learning, was a fragile thing on the frontier. And Thomas Whitmore wasn't a man who accepted defeat easily. The letter came 3 days later. This time, it wasn't delivered to the house. It came through the town clerk, official and legal. Ethan brought it home with a grim expression. "What is it?" Clara asked, though she already suspected. "A petition. Thomas is challenging the legitimacy of our marriage, claiming I married you to steal his child. Says Hope is legally his, and he wants custody." Clara's world tilted. "Can he do that?" "He can try. Doesn't mean he'll win." "But if he does—" "He won't." Ethan's voice was hard. "I won't let him take Hope. Or you." Clara wanted to believe him, but the law was on Thomas's side. He was Hope's biological father. He could prove it. And a judge might very well decide that a child belonged with her real father, not the man who'd married her mother out of convenience. "What do we do?" she asked. Ethan set the letter on the table. "We fight, and we make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Thomas Whitmore is." Clara looked at him, this quiet rancher who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd claimed a child that wasn't his, who'd stood up to her past without hesitation. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up on us." Ethan met her eyes. "You're my wife, Clara. Hope is my daughter. That's not something I take lightly, and it's sure as hell not something I'll walk away from when it gets hard." And Clara realized with a jolt that felt like lightning that what they'd built here was real. Maybe it hadn't started as love. Maybe it was still more partnership than romance, but it was solid and true and worth fighting for. "Then let's show Thomas Whitmore exactly what he's up against," she said. Ethan nodded, a fierce light in his eyes. "Yes, let's." The lawyer's office in town was stuffy and cramped, smelling of old leather and stale cigar smoke. Clara sat beside Ethan on a hard wooden bench while a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles reviewed their case. His name was Frederick Walsh, and he was the only lawyer within 50 miles who didn't immediately dismiss them when they explained the situation. "The problem," Walsh said, tapping his pen against the desk, "is that Mr. Whitmore has a legitimate claim. He's the biological father. The marriage to Mrs. Whitmore, Mrs. Hale, was legally binding when the child was conceived. He abandoned her," Ethan said flatly. "Left her pregnant at a stage stop with no money, no food, no way to survive." "Do you have witnesses to this abandonment?" Clara's stomach sank. "The stage driver saw me alone, but I don't know his name, and Thomas could claim he left me there temporarily, that he planned to return." Which is exactly what he's saying in his petition. Walsh set down the pen. "He claims he left you at the stage stop to secure lodging in the next town, that when he returned you were gone, that he's been searching for you ever since." "That's a lie," Clara said, her voice shaking with anger. He rode west with full saddlebags. The stage driver told me he saw him heading away at speed, alone. He had no intention of coming back. Again, without the driver as a witness, it's your word against his. Walsh leaned back in his chair. Now, the marriage to Mr. Hale complicates things. If we can prove that the marriage was entered into in good faith, that Mr. Hale has assumed full parental responsibility, we might be able to argue that the child's best interests are served by remaining with you. How do we prove good faith? Ethan asked. Witnesses? People who can testify that you're providing a stable home, that the child is thriving, that Mr. Whitmore's sudden interest in custody is motivated by something other than parental concern. Clara thought of Mrs. Garrison and her poisonous gossip, of the whispers that followed her through town. Most people in town think I trapped Ethan into marriage. They're not going to testify that we have a stable home. Then we need to change their minds, Walsh said, and quickly. The hearing is in 3 weeks. They left the lawyer's office with a plan that felt impossibly fragile. Clara needed to prove herself to a town that had already judged her. Ethan needed to demonstrate he was a fit father, and somehow they needed to expose Thomas as the liar he was. The first step was the hardest. Clara swallowed her pride and went calling on the women of the town. Mrs. Garrison was her first stop. The woman answered the door with barely concealed surprise. Mrs. Hale, what an unexpected visit. Clara held up a basket. I brought some preserves from the ranch. I thought you might enjoy them. Mrs. Garrison eyed the basket suspiciously. How thoughtful. May I come in? Just for a moment? The woman clearly wanted to refuse, but social convention won out. She stepped aside and Clara entered the neat, almost sterile parlor. I know what people are saying about me, Clara said before Mrs. Garrison could offer tea or small talk. I know you think I trapped Ethan Hale into marriage, that I'm an opportunist who took advantage of a widower's grief. Mrs. Garrison's face flushed. I never said you didn't have to. I heard you at the store. Clara kept her voice steady. But I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to ask for your help. That caught the woman off guard. My help? My former husband is trying to take my daughter. He abandoned me when I was pregnant, left me to die. And now he wants to take hope away from the only family she's ever known. He's using the gossip about me and Ethan to make his case. Clara met Mrs. Garrison's eyes. I'm asking you, as one mother to another, to consider what's best for that child. Not what the law says, not what makes for good gossip, what's actually best for a baby who needs stability and love. Mrs. Garrison was silent for a long moment. Then she said, Why did you marry Mr. Hale so quickly? Clara had prepared for this question, but the truth still felt vulnerable. Because he offered me safety when I had none. Because he's a good man raising 3 children alone and doing his best. Because we made a bargain that benefited us both. She paused. And because I was terrified. My husband had left me. I had no money, no prospects, and a baby coming. Ethan gave me a chance to survive. So yes, I married him quickly, but not to trap him. To save myself and my daughter. That's not a very romantic reason. No, but it's an honest one. Clara straightened her shoulders. I work hard, Mrs. Garrison. I take care of those children like they're my own. I've brought order to a house that was falling apart. I'm not asking you to like me. I'm asking you to tell the truth if you're called to testify. That Hope is in a stable home with people who love her. Mrs. Garrison studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then she said, My husband left me once, 20 years ago, before we had children. Ran off with another woman. Came back 6 months later, tail between his legs, expecting me to take him back. Her voice was brittle. I did, because I had no choice. A woman alone has no standing, but I never forgot what it felt like to be abandoned. Clara's throat tightened. What happened? We made it work. Had children. Built a life. But it was never the same. There was always that knowledge that he could leave again if he chose. Mrs. Garrison's expression softened slightly. You didn't go back to your husband? No. That takes courage or stubbornness. Both, probably. Mrs. Garrison almost smiled. I'll think about what you've said, and if I'm called to testify, I'll speak to what I've observed, which is that those Hale children seem happier than they've been since their mother passed. It wasn't a declaration of support, but it was something. Clara thanked her and left, then repeated the same conversation with 5 other women. Some were sympathetic, others remained coldly judgmental, but by the end of the week, Clara had planted seeds of doubt about the gossip and seeds of truth about her situation. Meanwhile, Ethan worked a different angle. He called in favors from neighboring ranchers, men he'd helped over the years. They agreed to testify about his character, his dedication to his children, his reputation as a fair and honest man. It wasn't much, but it was a foundation. At home, life continued with a strange sense of urgency. Every meal Clara cooked felt like evidence. Every moment she spent with the children felt like proof. She found herself performing motherhood with an audience in mind, even though the only witnesses were the family itself. Emma noticed.
"Why are you acting weird?" she asked one evening as Clara fussed over James's torn shirt for the 3rd time. "I'm not acting weird." "Yes, you are. You keep staring at us like you're trying to memorize us." Clara set down the shirt. "I'm sorry. I'm just worried." Emma sat beside her. "About the hearing?" "Yes. Papa says we won't let that man take hope." "Your papa's right. We won't." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I don't remember much about when Mama was sick."
But I remember being scared that she'd go away and never come back. She looked at Clara. "You won't go away, will you?" Clara pulled Emma into a hug. "No, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" "I promise." It was a promise Clara desperately wanted to keep, but as the days ticked down toward the hearing, doubt crept in. What if the judge sided with Thomas? What if her past was too shameful to overcome? What if being a good mother now didn't erase the fact that she'd conceived hope in a marriage that had failed? The night before the hearing, Clara couldn't sleep. She paced her small room, Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle, oblivious to the storm coming. Every creak of the house made Clara's heart race. Every shadow seemed threatening. Around midnight, there was a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find Ethan standing there, still fully dressed. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "No." He glanced past her at Hope. "Can we talk?" They went to the kitchen, the now familiar ritual. Clara made coffee this time, needing something stronger than warm milk. They sat across from each other in the lamplight. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, "about what happens if the judge rules against us." Clara's hands tightened around her cup. "Don't. We have to consider it. If Thomas gets custody, he won't. We won't let him." "Clara." Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. "If the law says he gets hope, we can't just ignore that." "Watch me." Clara's voice was fierce. "I will take her and run before I let Thomas have her. I'll go somewhere he can't find us. And then you'll be a fugitive. He'll have the law on his side. They'll hunt you down, and when they find you, you'll lose her anyway. And probably end up in jail." Clara knew he was right, but the thought of surrendering Hope was unbearable. "So what do we do?" Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture was unexpected, and Clara froze. His palm was calloused and warm. "We trust that we've done enough, that the truth will matter, and if it doesn't—" He paused. "If it doesn't, we figure out the next step together. But we don't run. Running makes us look guilty." "I am guilty. I married you to escape Thomas. I used you." "We used each other. That was the deal, remember?" Ethan's grip tightened. "But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. At least for me. This family, you, me, the kids, it's real now. Not a bargain, not a convenience. Real." Clara's breath caught. "Ethan, I'm not asking you to love me. I know that's not part of this, but I need you to know that I'm in this completely. Hope is my daughter, you're my wife, and I will fight for both of you with everything I have." Tears stung Clara's eyes. "Why? Why do you care so much?" "Because you brought my family back to life. Because you're the strongest person I've ever met. Because—" He stopped, seeming to wrestle with something. "Because Sarah told me before she died that I needed to let people in. That I had a habit of keeping everyone at arm's length, even her sometimes. She made me promise I'd try to do better. And then you showed up, and you needed help, and helping you made me better. Made me the kind of man Sarah wanted me to be." Clara turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. "She sounds like she was remarkable." "She was, but so are you." They sat like that for a long time, hands joined across the table, drawing strength from each other. And when they finally went to bed, Clara felt steadier, not unafraid, but ready. The courthouse was packed. Clara hadn't expected so many people, but apparently a custody battle involving abandonment and remarriage was prime entertainment in a town starved for drama. She walked in beside Ethan, holding Hope against her chest, and felt every eye in the room track her movement. Thomas was already there, sitting with his own lawyer, a slick man from Phoenix who looked expensive. Thomas had cleaned up even more since his last visit, his hair neatly trimmed, his suit pressed. He looked like a respectable gentleman wronged by a wayward wife. Clara wanted to scream at the injustice of it. The judge was an older man named Thornton, with a severe face and sharp eyes. He called the court to order and reviewed the petition. Mr. Whitmore, you're seeking custody of the child known as Hope Whitmore, currently in the care of Mrs. Clara Hale and her husband Ethan Hale. Is that correct? Thomas stood. Yes, Your Honor. That child is my daughter. My wife left me and married another man within weeks, and now she's trying to deny me my rights as a father. Mrs. Hale, how do you respond? Clara stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. Mr. Whitmore abandoned me when I was 8 months pregnant. He left me at a remote stage stop with no money, no food, and no way to reach safety. I only survived because Mr. Hale found me and offered me shelter. When Mr. Whitmore finally came looking for me, it was months later, after I'd already rebuilt my life. He has no right to that child. The law would disagree, Mrs. Hale. Mr. Whitmore is the biological father. Biology doesn't make a father, Your Honor. Being there does, caring does. My husband, Ethan Hale, was there when Hope was born. He's fed her, protected her, loved her. That makes him her father. Judge Thornton looked at Thomas. Mr. Whitmore, can you explain your absence? Thomas's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client temporarily left his wife at the stage stop to secure better accommodations ahead. When he returned, she was gone. He's been searching for her ever since. That's a lie, Clara said. The stage driver saw him riding west, alone, with no intention of returning. Do you have this driver as a witness? Clara's heart sank. No, Your Honor. I don't know his name. Then it's your word against Mr. Whitmore's. The judge made a note. Mr. Walsh, do you have witnesses for the defense? Frederick Walsh stood and called their first witness, Ethan. Ethan took the stand with calm confidence. He described finding Clara at the stage stop, her condition, the arrangement they'd made. He spoke about Hope's birth, about raising her alongside his other children, about the life they'd built as a family. Mr. Hale, the judge asked, did you marry Mrs. Whitmore knowing she was carrying another man's child? Yes, Your Honor. Why? Because she needed help, and I needed help, and it seemed like we could help each other, but also because it was the right thing to do. A pregnant woman abandoned in the desert, I couldn't just leave her there. And you claim the child as your own? Yes, Your Honor. Hope is my daughter in every way that matters. Thomas's lawyer cross-examined, trying to paint Ethan as a lonely widower who'd been manipulated. But Ethan didn't waver. He answered every question with straightforward honesty, and by the time he stepped down, even Clara could see the judge was impressed. Walsh called the neighboring ranchers next. They testified about Ethan's character, his dedication to his family, his reputation in the community. Then he called Mrs. Garrison. Clara held her breath as the woman took the stand. Mrs. Garrison, you've observed the Hale household. What can you tell the court about the care of the children? Mrs. Garrison folded her hands primly. I've observed that the children are clean, well-fed, and happy. Mrs. Hale runs an orderly household. She's brought stability to a family that was struggling after the loss of Mrs. Sarah Hale. And the baby, Hope? She's thriving. I've seen Mrs. Hale with her. She's attentive, loving, and competent. In your opinion, is Hope in a good home? Mrs. Garrison looked directly at Thomas. Yes, and I would hate to see that child torn from the only family she's known and given to a man who, by all accounts, left her mother to die. Thomas's face reddened. His lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Walsh called 2 more townswomen who offered similar testimony. Then he rested the defense. Thomas's lawyer called only one witness, Thomas himself. Thomas took the stand and spun a tale of misunderstanding and desperation. He He claimed he'd left Clara briefly to scout ahead, that he'd been robbed on the road and it had taken him weeks to get back, that when he finally returned to the stage stop, she was gone, and he'd been searching ever since. It was a good story, believable even, and Clara could see some of the spectators nodding along. Then Walsh stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Whitmore, you claim you were robbed. Do you have any documentation of this? A report filed with local authorities?" Thomas hesitated. "No, I was in the middle of nowhere. There were no authorities." "I see. And these robbers, they took everything?" "Yes." "Your money, your supplies, but not your horse or your saddle?" "They were scared off before they could take everything." "How convenient." Walsh paced in front of the stand. "Mr. Whitmore, how much money did you have when you left your wife at the stage stop?" "I don't recall exactly. More than $50. "Possibly. And yet you claim you couldn't afford to bring your pregnant wife with you to secure these better accommodations?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "It was a difficult situation. I'm sure it was. Especially for your wife, left alone in the desert." Walsh pulled out a paper. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a letter from a boarding house in Tucson. It shows that Mr. Whitmore stayed there for 3 nights, 2 weeks after he allegedly left his wife. He paid in cash. Quite a lot of cash, according to the proprietor." Thomas went pale. That must be a mistake." "The proprietor remembers you quite clearly, says you were alone, says you told him you were heading to California to start fresh, no mention of a wife." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel. Clara's heart was pounding. She hadn't known Walsh had found this evidence. Hope, that beautiful, desperate hope, surged through her. Thomas's lawyer tried to recover, but the damage was catastrophic. His story had been exposed as a lie, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. When it was time for closing arguments, Walsh stood and spoke with quiet passion about the sanctity of family, the importance of stability for a child, and the clear evidence that Thomas Whitmore had abandoned his responsibilities and was now trying to claim them back only out of pride or spite. Thomas's lawyer argued about biology and legal rights, but his heart clearly wasn't in it anymore. Judge Thornton called for a recess to consider his ruling. Clara, Ethan, and Walsh waited in a small side room. Hope fussed, and Clara rocked her, whispering soothing nonsense. "I think we have a good chance," Walsh said. "That boarding house letter was damning." "Where did you find it?" Clara asked. "I hired an investigator, tracked Whitmore's movements after he left you. Took some digging, but we got lucky." Ethan squeezed Clara's shoulder. "It's going to be all right." Clara wanted to believe him, but she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. After what felt like hours, they were called back. The courtroom was silent as Judge Thornton took his seat. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony," he said. "This is a complicated case involving questions of abandonment, remarriage, and the best interests of a child. Mr. Whitmore claims he left his wife temporarily and was prevented from returning by circumstances beyond his control. However, the evidence suggests otherwise. The boarding house records, the testimony of witnesses, and the timeline of events paint a picture of a man who chose to leave his pregnant wife and only returned when it became clear she had found stability elsewhere." Thomas half rose from his seat, but his lawyer pulled him back down. "On the other hand," the judge continued, "Mrs. Hale has demonstrated that she's provided a stable, loving home for the child in question. Hope Whitmore, or Hope Hale, as she's known, is thriving in the care of Mrs. Hale and her husband. The testimony of community members supports this, and most importantly, Mr. Ethan Hale has assumed full parental responsibility for this child, treating her as his own daughter." Clara's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold Hope. "The law gives weight to biological parenthood, but it also recognizes the importance of a child's welfare. In this case, removing Hope from the only home she's known and giving her to a man who has demonstrated questionable judgment and reliability would not serve her best interests." Judge Thornton looked directly at Thomas. "Mr. Whitmore, your petition for custody is denied. Hope will remain in the care of Mr. and Mrs. Hale. Furthermore, I'm granting the Hales full legal custody. You will have no parental rights." The courtroom exploded. Clara heard Thomas shouting, his lawyer trying to calm him, people talking over each other. But all she could focus on was the weight of Hope in her arms and the fact that her daughter was safe. Ethan pulled both of them into his arms, and Clara buried her face against his shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's over," he murmured. "It's over." But even as relief flooded through her, Clara knew it wasn't quite over. Thomas was furious, his face purple with rage as he was escorted from the courtroom. Men like him didn't accept defeat gracefully. Still, for now, they'd won. Hope was theirs. The family was intact, and that was enough. They celebrated quietly that night, back at the ranch. Emma baked a cake that came out lopsided but tasted sweet, and James sat closer to Clara at dinner than he ever had before. Lily climbed into Clara's lap and fell asleep there, her small body warm and trusting. Hope dozed in her cradle, oblivious to the fact that she'd just been permanently claimed by people who chose her, rather than being bound to her by blood alone. Clara watched Ethan across the table as he helped James with his arithmetic, patient and thorough, and felt something shift inside her chest. This man had stood beside her in a courtroom and declared her daughter his own, had fought for them both without hesitation, had built a wall between them and the past, brick by careful brick, until Thomas Whitmore couldn't reach them anymore. She'd told herself she couldn't love him, that this marriage was practical, nothing more. But sitting there in the lamplight, watching him be a father to children who desperately needed one, Clara wondered if she'd been lying to herself all along. After the children were in bed, Clara found Ethan on the porch. The desert night was cool, stars scattered across the sky like salt spilled on black cloth. He was smoking, something she'd rarely seen him do. "Celebrating?" she asked. He glanced at her, then stubbed out the cigarette. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how close we came to losing." He leaned against the porch rail. That judge could have ruled the other way. The law was on Thomas's side. But he didn't. We won. This time. Ethan's expression was troubled. Men like Thomas don't give up easy. He was humiliated in there today, his lies exposed in front of the whole town. That kind of man doesn't just walk away. Clara had been trying not to think about that. "What do you think he'll do?" "I don't know, but we should be careful." "You think he'll come here?" "I think he's angry and unpredictable. So yes, we should be ready." Clara moved to stand beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "I won't let him take Hope, whatever it takes." "I know. That's what worries me." Ethan turned to face her. "Promise me you won't do anything reckless. If Thomas shows up, if there's trouble, you let me handle it. I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting. I know that, but I also know you'd walk into fire for that baby, and I'm asking you to trust me to stand between you and the flames." Clara wanted to argue. She'd spent too long relying on herself to easily surrender control, but she saw the earnestness in Ethan's eyes, the genuine care behind his words. "All right," she said. "I trust you." Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but profound. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Clara," he said quietly, "I know this started as a bargain, but somewhere along the way, it became real for me. This family, you, I need you to know that." Clara's breath caught. "Ethan, you don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for something you can't give. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Clara placed her hand over his, still resting against her face. "I'm not good at this. Trusting people, letting them in. Thomas taught me that loving someone can destroy you. I'm not Thomas. I know." And she did. Ethan was solid where Thomas had been mercurial, honest where Thomas had been charming, present where Thomas had been absent. "I'm just scared of feeling too much, of losing it." "Then we'll be scared together." Ethan's thumb traced her cheekbone. "And we'll figure it out as we go." Clara leaned into his touch, letting herself have this moment of vulnerability. They stood like that under the stars, connected by something that had started as convenience and grown into something neither of them could quite name. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. Clara was in the garden with Hope in a sling against her chest, pulling weeds that never seemed to stop growing, when she heard horses. Multiple horses. She looked up to see 3 riders approaching, and her blood turned cold. Thomas was in the lead, flanked by 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize. They were armed, pistols visible at their hips, and their expressions were hard. Clara straightened slowly, her mind racing. Ethan was out checking fences on the far side of the property. Emma and James were in the barn. Lily was napping inside. Clara was alone, and Thomas knew it. He dismounted with casual arrogance, his companions staying on their horses. "Clara, we need to talk." "The court said everything that needs to be said. You have no rights to hope. Leave my property." "Your property?" Thomas laughed, cold and cruel. "You mean the property you acquired by spreading your legs for a lonely rancher?" Clara's hands clenched. "Get out." "Not without my daughter." "She's not your daughter. The judge was very clear." Thomas took a step closer. "The judge was a fool. That child is mine by blood, and I'm not walking away from what's mine." "You walked away from her months ago. You don't get to change your mind now." "I can do whatever I want." His voice dropped, dangerous. "You humiliated me, Clara. Made me look like a liar and a coward in front of everyone. Nobody does that to me." One of the men behind him shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his gun. Clara's heart pounded. She was alone, unarmed, with an infant strapped to her chest. If this turned violent, she had no way to protect Hope. "Papa!" Emma's voice rang out from the barn. "Papa, there are men here!" Thomas glanced toward the barn, irritation flashing across his face. "Tell your stepchildren to stay out of this." "They're not my stepchildren. They're my children." Clara kept her voice steady even as fear coiled in her stomach. "And you need to leave before my husband gets back." "Your husband?" Thomas spat the word like a curse. "That sanctimonious bastard who stood in court and pretended he was better than me. Where is he?" "Close enough to hear if I scream." It was a bluff, but Thomas didn't know that. He hesitated, looking around. The momentary uncertainty gave Clara an opening. "You lost, Thomas. The law sided with us. Coming here, threatening us, that's only going to make things worse for you. If you leave now, we can all move on with our lives." "I don't want to move on. I want my daughter, and what I want, I take." He lunged for Hope. Clara twisted away, but Thomas was faster. His hand closed on her arm, yanking her around. Hope started crying, and Clara's maternal instinct blazed into fury. She brought her knee up hard, catching Thomas in the thigh. Not where she'd aimed, but enough to make him stumble back. "Don't touch her!" Clara screamed. The barn door burst open and Emma ran out, followed by James. Emma was holding a pitchfork, her young face set with determination that would have been comical if the situation weren't so dire. "Leave her alone!" Emma shouted, brandishing the pitchfork like a weapon. Thomas looked at the children, then at Clara, and something ugly crossed his face. "You've turned them against me, against their own blood." "They're not your blood, they're Hale children. The baby is mine." "No, she's not anymore. You gave up that right when you abandoned us." Thomas's hand went to his gun. Time seemed to slow. Clara saw his fingers curl around the grip, saw the cold calculation in his eyes. She knew with absolute certainty that he was capable of violence, that his pride was wounded deep enough to make him reckless. She stepped back, shielding Hope with her body. Emma moved forward with the pitchfork. James picked up a rock, and then a rifle cocked, the sound sharp and unmistakable. Everyone froze. Ethan stood at the edge of the yard, rifle raised and pointed directly at Thomas. His face was calm, but his eyes were hard as granite. "Step away from my wife," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Thomas's hand was still on his gun. "This doesn't concern you, Hale. Everything about my family concerns me. Now take your hand off that pistol real slow and step back. You won't shoot me, not with all these witnesses. You threatening my wife and children makes it self-defense. Every person here will testify to that, including your own men." Ethan's aim didn't waver. "So ask yourself, is your pride worth dying for?" The two men behind Thomas exchanged glances. One of them cleared his throat. "Boss, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Thomas snapped. But uncertainty had crept into his expression. He was calculating odds, and they weren't in his favor. Slowly, he moved his hand away from his gun. "Emma, James, get inside," Ethan said, never taking his eyes off Thomas. "Clara, take the baby and go with them." "Ethan, now!" Clara didn't argue. She gathered the children and hurried toward the house, though she stopped just inside the door, watching through the window. Ethan kept the rifle trained on Thomas. You have two choices. You can leave now and never come back, or you can try for that gun, and I'll put you down like the rabid dog you are. You can't keep me from my daughter. I can, and I will. The law gave me that right. But more than that, I have the will. You don't. Ethan took a step forward. You abandoned Clara because she became inconvenient. You came back because your pride was hurt, not because you love that child. Men like you don't love anything but yourselves. You don't know anything about me. I know you left a pregnant woman to die in the desert. I know you lied in court. I know you just tried to assault my wife in front of witnesses. Ethan's voice was steel. I know exactly what kind of man you are. Thomas's face flushed dark red. For a moment, Clara thought he might go for his gun anyway, pride overriding self-preservation. But then one of his men said, Mr. Whitmore, this ain't worth it. We should ride out. Thomas stood there, fist clenched, jaw working. Then he spun on his heel and mounted his horse. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Ethan said. If I see you on my property again, I'll shoot you on sight. That's not a threat. It's a promise. Thomas yanked his horse around and spurred it hard. His companions followed, and within moments they were disappearing into a cloud of dust. Ethan stood there for a long time, rifle still raised, making sure they were really gone. Then he lowered the weapon and walked to the house. Clara met him at the door. Are you all right? He asked, his hands moving over her shoulders, checking for injuries. I'm fine. He didn't hurt us. If I'd been 5 minutes later, Ethan's voice was rough. But you weren't. You came exactly when we needed you. Ethan pulled her against him, careful of hope between them, and Clara felt him shaking, not from fear, from fury barely contained. If he'd touched you, Ethan said into her hair, if he'd hurt Hope, he didn't. We're safe. Emma appeared in the doorway, still clutching the pitchfork. Is he really gone? He's gone, Ethan said. Will he come back? Ethan looked at his daughter, this fierce girl who'd been ready to fight a grown man to protect her family. I don't know, but if he does, we'll be ready. That night, Ethan didn't go to his own room. He sat in the rocking chair in Clara's room, rifle across his lap, keeping watch. Clara didn't argue. She climbed into bed with Hope beside her and tried to sleep, but every sound made her jolt awake. Around midnight, she gave up and sat with Ethan. You should rest, she said. Can't. You'll be exhausted tomorrow. Don't care? He glanced at her. I keep seeing it, him grabbing for you. And I keep thinking about what could have happened if I'd been farther out, if I hadn't heard Emma yelling. Clara reached over and took his hand. But you did hear. You came. That's what matters. It's not enough. We need to be better prepared. I'm going to teach you to shoot. Ethan, no arguments. If I'm out working and Thomas comes back, you need to be able to defend yourself and the children. Clara wanted to protest that she'd never held a gun, that the idea of shooting someone terrified her. But she'd seen the look in Thomas's eyes today, the cold willingness to take what he wanted, regardless of who got hurt. All right, she said, teach me. Over the next week, Ethan drilled Clara on gun safety and marksmanship. She was a terrible shot at first, flinching every time she pulled the trigger, but she practiced every morning while the children did chores, and gradually her aim improved. She still didn't like guns, but she learned to respect them. And more importantly, she learned she could use one if she had to. Emma asked to learn too, and after some hesitation, Ethan agreed. You're old enough to understand this is serious, not a game. I know, Papa. And you never ever point a gun at something you're not willing to kill. Emma nodded solemnly, and Ethan taught her the same lessons he'd taught Clara. By the end of the week, both of them could hit a target at 20 yards more often than not. Meanwhile, Ethan fortified the ranch. He fixed the sagging fences, installed better locks on the doors, and arranged with neighboring ranchers to check on each other regularly. The community had rallied after the hearing, impressed by the Hales fight and appalled by Thomas's behavior. Men who'd barely spoken to Ethan before now stopped by to offer support. If Whitmore shows his face around here, he'll regret it, one grizzled rancher told Ethan. We take care of our own. It should have made Clara feel safer, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas wasn't done. Men like him didn't accept defeat. They just waited for the right opportunity to strike back. The opportunity came 2 weeks later in the form of fire. Clara woke to smoke, not the clean smell of a fireplace, but the acrid, choking stench of burning wood and hay. She bolted upright, grabbing Hope from her cradle, and ran to the window. The barn was ablaze. "Ethan!" She screamed his name, running through the house. "Ethan, fire!" He was already up, pulling on his boots. "Get the children out! Take them to the creek!" "The animals! I'll get them! Just get the kids to safety!" Clara ran to Emma's room. "Emma, wake up! Fire! Get James and Lily!" Emma's eyes went wide, but she didn't panic. She grabbed James, who stumbled along half asleep, while Clara scooped up Lily. They ran out of the house into a yard lit orange by flames. The barn was fully engulfed, fire licking up the walls and consuming the roof. Ethan was already there, throwing open the horse stalls. The animals were screaming, terrified, and the sound cut through Clara's heart. "Go!" Ethan shouted at her. "Get them away from here!" Clara wanted to help, wanted to do something, but she had 3 children and a baby to protect. She herded Emma, James, and Lily toward the creek, glancing back to see Ethan leading horses out of the inferno. At the creek, Clara set Lily down and handed Hope to Emma. "Stay here. Don't move." "Where are you going?" Emma demanded. "To help your father." "Mama said you'd stay with us." Clara froze. It was the first time Emma had called her that. Not Clara. Mama. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. "I will. I promise. But I have to help him first." She ran back toward the fire before Emma could argue. The heat was intense, pushing her back with almost physical force. Ethan had gotten 3 horses out and was going back for more. Clara grabbed buckets and started hauling water from the well, throwing it on the flames even though she knew it was futile. The barn was too far gone. Ethan emerged with the last horse, coughing and covered in soot. "That's all of them. Did you see anyone? Someone must have set this." "I didn't see anyone, but this was deliberate. I can smell kerosene." The barn collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending up a column of sparks into the night sky. Clara and Ethan stumbled back, shielding their faces from the heat. By the time neighboring ranchers arrived, drawn by the glow of the fire, there was nothing left to save. They helped contain the blaze so it didn't spread to the house or other buildings, but the barn was a total loss. In the gray light of dawn, Clara stood looking at the smoking ruins. Everything they'd stored there was gone. The winter hay, tools, saddles, months of work reduced to ash. Emma came to stand beside her, still holding Hope. The baby was fussing, but Emma rocked her with surprising competence. "Thomas did this," Emma said flatly. "We don't know that." "Yes, we do." Clara wanted to deny it, but Emma was right. This had Thomas written all over it, petty revenge for his wounded pride. Ethan joined them, his face grim. "I found tracks leading away from the barn. 2 riders. They came in from the north, set the fire, and rode out." "Did you recognize the tracks?" "No, but I recognized the boot print near the kerosene can." He looked at Clara. "It matches the boots Thomas was wearing when he came here last time." Rage, hot and bright, flooded through Clara. "We need to go to the sheriff." "And tell him what? That we found boot prints? He'll say anyone could have made them." "So we just let him get away with this?" "No, but we can't prove it was him, not in a way the law will care about." Ethan's jaw was tight. This is what he wants. To goad us into doing something reckless so he can claim we're the aggressors. So we do nothing? We rebuild. And we watch. And if he comes back, when he comes back, we'll be ready. It took 2 months to rebuild the barn. The community helped, pitching in with lumber and labor and the kind of solidarity that frontier life demanded. Clara worked alongside the men, hammering nails and hauling boards, while Emma watched the younger children and kept the workers fed. During those months, there was no sign of Thomas. No attacks, no threats, nothing. It should have been a relief, but instead it made Clara more nervous. She knew he was out there watching, waiting for another opportunity. The not knowing was worse than the knowing. One evening, as they sat down to dinner in the partially rebuilt barn they'd been eating there to celebrate the progress, James said, "Mama, when is the bad man going to come back?" Clara's heart clenched. James had started calling her Mama too, quietly, as if testing the word. And now he was asking the question they'd all been thinking. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope he doesn't. I don't like being scared." "Me neither," Emma said.
Clara looked at these children who'd been through so much loss and were now facing threat because of her, because she'd brought Thomas Whitmore into their lives. "I'm sorry," she said. "This is my fault. If I hadn't come here, then we wouldn't have you," Emma interrupted. "And that would be worse." "Emma's right," Ethan said. "Thomas is the problem, not you, and we're going to handle it together."
That night, after the children were in bed, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments at the end of the day. "I've been thinking," Clara said. "Maybe we should leave. Take the children and go somewhere Thomas can't find us." "Run?" "Start over, somewhere safe." Ethan shook his head. "This is our home. We've put too much into this place to abandon it, and running won't solve anything. Men like Thomas, they don't stop just because you move. They hunt." "Then what do we do?" "We stand our ground. We protect what's ours. And we trust that eventually, Thomas will make a mistake big enough that even the law can't ignore it." Clara leaned against him, and Ethan's arm came around her shoulders. They sat like that, drawing strength from each other, while the stars wheeled overhead and the desert night settled around them. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. As a family, as partners who'd chosen each other not out of desperation, but out of something that had grown slowly and steadily into something real. Something worth fighting for. The mistake came on a cold November morning, 6 months after the barn fire. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw the rider approaching. Her hand moved instinctively to the rifle she now kept within reach, but she relaxed when she recognized the horse. It was Sheriff Coleman, a tired-looking man in his 50s who'd been sympathetic during the custody hearing, but ultimately powerless to help them beyond that. "Mrs. Hale," he said, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "Is your husband around?" "He's in the north pasture. I can fetch him if it's urgent." "It is. But you should hear this too." Coleman's expression was grim. "Thomas Whitmore was arrested last night in Tucson." Clara's heart stuttered. "Arrested? For what?" "Attempted robbery. He and those 2 men who've been riding with him tried to hold up a stagecoach. Didn't go well for them. The driver was armed, got the drop on them. One of Whitmore's men was killed. The other one and Whitmore were taken into custody." Clara gripped the clothesline to steady herself. Will he be charged?" "More than charged. They found evidence linking him to 3 other robberies in the territory. He's looking at serious prison time." Coleman paused. "There's more. The man who died. His name was Bill Carver. Before he died, he talked. Said Whitmore hired them to burn down your barn. Said Whitmore was planning to come back here, take the baby by force, and disappear into Mexico." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd known Thomas was behind the fire, but hearing it confirmed, hearing that he'd planned to kidnap Hope, made her knees weak. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Jail in Tucson. Federal marshal is handling it since it involves stagecoach robbery. He won't be getting out, Mrs. Hale, not for a very long time." Clara didn't feel the relief she'd expected. Instead, she felt numb. "What happens now?" "There'll be a trial. You and your husband might be called to testify about the barn fire and his previous threats. But honestly, between the robbery charges and the confession about the arson, Whitmore's done. He's going away for 20 years, minimum." After Coleman left, Clara stood in the yard for a long time, laundry forgotten. Hope was napping in the house. Emma and James were at school in town, a new development that had pleased Clara enormously. Lily was playing in the dirt near the porch, making elaborate mud pies with intense concentration. Everything looked exactly as it had an hour ago, but the world had fundamentally shifted. Thomas was gone. Really, truly gone. Not hiding, not planning, not waiting for his moment. Locked away where he couldn't hurt them. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollowed out, as if she'd been carrying a weight for so long that removing it left her unbalanced. Her hands trembled as she resumed hanging the laundry, each piece of clothing a small act of normalcy in a day that had suddenly turned surreal. Lily looked up from her mud creations. "Mama sad?" Clara's heart squeezed at the name. Lily had been calling her that for months now, as naturally as breathing. "No, sweetheart, Mama's just thinking." "Think too hard makes your face funny." Despite everything, Clara laughed. "You're probably right." She finished the laundry and went about her daily tasks with mechanical precision. Bread needed kneading. The chickens needed feeding. Hope would wake soon and need nursing. Life continued its relentless march forward, whether you were ready or not. Ethan came home at sunset, dusty and tired from mending fences in the far pasture. Clara met him in the yard and told him everything Coleman had said. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable in the fading light. When she finished, he said, "How do you feel?" "I don't know, relieved, I suppose, but also strange, like I've been preparing for a fight that's suddenly over before it began." Ethan pulled her into his arms, and Clara let herself lean against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "It's over, Clara. He can't touch you anymore. Can't touch any of us." Clara buried her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar smell of dust and sweat and sun-warmed cotton. "I keep thinking about what Coleman said, that Thomas was planning to take Hope and run to Mexico, if he'd succeeded, but he didn't. He tried to be what he always was, a thief and a coward, and it caught up with him." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "We're safe now, really safe. Are we? What if there's a trial and the judge decides Thomas's confession was coerced? What if his lawyer finds some technicality?" "Clara," Ethan pulled back to look at her face. "You've been living on the edge of fear for so long, you don't know how to step back from it. But you need to try, for your own sake, for Hope's sake." "I don't know if I can. Every time I think we're safe, something else happens." "Nothing else is going to happen. Thomas is in a federal jail. He robbed a U.S. mail stagecoach. That's serious. They don't let people walk away from that." Clara wanted to believe him, but trust didn't come easily anymore. "When is the trial?" Coleman said probably 6 weeks. They need to gather evidence, interview witnesses. "And we have to testify?" "Probably, about the barn fire, about his threats." Ethan tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But that's all we have to do, tell the truth. The rest is up to the law." That night, Clara slept fitfully, dreams chasing her through darkness. She saw Thomas's face twisted with rage, saw the barn burning, flames reaching for the sky, saw him riding toward the house with Hope in his arms, disappearing into the desert while Clara screamed and couldn't move. She woke gasping, sweat-soaked and trembling. Ethan was there immediately, pulling her against him. "Just a dream," he murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." Clara clung to him, waiting for her heartbeat to slow. In the cradle beside the bed, Hope slept peacefully, one small hand curled near her face. The sight of her daughter, safe and unaware, helped Clara's breathing settle. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to wake you." "Don't apologize. You've been through hell. Bad dreams are the least of what you're entitled to." Clara pressed her forehead against Ethan's shoulder. "I hate feeling like this. Weak and scared." "You're the strongest person I know. But even strong people get scared. That's not weakness. That's being human." They lay there in the darkness, holding each other until Clara's breathing evened out and sleep claimed her again. This time, there were no dreams. The weeks leading up to the trial passed in a strange blur. Clara threw herself into work, cleaning the house until it gleamed, baking enough bread to feed an army, organizing every closet and cupboard until Emma finally said, "Mama, you're making us all nervous." Clara stopped mid-scrub, bucket in hand. "Am I? You cleaned my room 3 times this week, and it wasn't even dirty." Emma sat at the kitchen table, watching Clara with knowing eyes that seemed too old for 12. "You're worried about the trial." There was no point in lying. Emma was too perceptive. "Yes. Papa says we don't have to worry, that the bad man is going to prison for sure. Your papa's probably right." "But you don't believe him." Clara set down the bucket and sat across from Emma. "I want to believe him. But I've learned that wanting something doesn't make it true. And I've learned that men like Thomas Whitmore have a way of twisting things to their advantage." Emma was quiet for a moment. "My real mama used to say that worrying about things you can't control is like trying to stop rain by holding up your hands. You just get wet and tired." Clara's throat tightened. "Your mama sounds like she was very wise." "She was. But so are you." Emma reached across the table and took Clara's hand. "You taught me that being scared doesn't mean you quit. It means you keep going even when you're afraid. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go to that trial, and we're going to tell the truth, and we're going to trust that it'll be enough." Clara squeezed Emma's hand, overwhelmed by love for this girl who'd fought so hard against accepting her and now offered comfort with such grace. "When did you get so grown up?" "I had a good teacher." The day of the trial arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if November had forgotten it was supposed to be cold. Clara dressed carefully in her best dress, still plain, but clean and neatly pressed, and braided her hair with trembling fingers. Ethan had arranged for a neighbor woman to watch the younger children, but Emma insisted on coming. "I want to be there," she said firmly. "He threatened our family. I have a right to see him face justice." Ethan and Clara exchanged glances. Finally, Ethan nodded. "All right, but you stay close to us. And if things get difficult, you leave. Understood?" "Understood." The courthouse in Tucson was larger and more imposing than the one where the custody hearing had been held. Federal cases were different, Clara learned, more formal, more serious. The courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and other people whose crimes were being adjudicated that day. Thomas was brought in wearing shackles, his clothes rumpled and his face gaunt. He'd lost weight in jail, and there was a hardness to his eyes that hadn't been there before. When he saw Clara, something flickered across his face, rage perhaps, or shame, but he looked away quickly. The trial itself was methodical and thorough. The prosecutor, a stern-faced man named Morrison, laid out the evidence piece by piece. The stagecoach robbery, the murder of the driver's assistant during the holdup, the confession from Bill Carver implicating Thomas in multiple crimes, including the barn fire. Carver's partner, a man named Dutch Henderson, testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. He described how Thomas had hired them to burn the Hale barn as revenge, how Thomas had talked obsessively about getting his daughter back, about making Clara pay for humiliating him. He said she needed to learn her place, Henderson testified. Said he'd take the kid and disappear where nobody could find them. Then he'd come back later and make Mr. Hale regret ever crossing him. Clara felt Ethan stiffen beside her. His hand found hers under the table, gripped tight enough to hurt. When it was Clara's turn to testify, she walked to the stand with her head high. Morrison asked her to describe Thomas's abandonment, his return, the custody battle, and the barn fire. Clara told it all in a steady voice, refusing to let Thomas see her fear. Thomas's lawyer, a young man who looked uncomfortable with his client, tried to paint Clara as vindictive. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Hale, that you remarried suspiciously quickly after your husband left?" "My former husband abandoned me pregnant in the desert. I remarried to survive. There's nothing suspicious about that? And isn't it true that you've poisoned his daughter against him?" Hope doesn't know Thomas Whitmore. She knows Ethan Hale as her father because that's who raised her from birth. "But you've denied Mr. Whitmore his paternal rights." "Mr. Whitmore denied himself those rights when he rode away and left me to die." Clara's voice sharpened. "You can't abandon your responsibilities and then demand them back when it's convenient." The lawyer tried a few more angles, but Clara didn't waver. When she stepped down, Morrison gave her a small nod of approval. Ethan testified next, describing the barn fire, the financial losses, the fear that had gripped their family for months. His testimony was calm and factual, but there was an undercurrent of controlled anger that made several jury members lean forward. The trial lasted 3 days. On the final day, Thomas took the stand in his own defense. His lawyer had advised against it, Clara could tell, but Thomas's arrogance wouldn't allow him to stay silent. He spun a tale of misunderstanding and misfortune. He'd left Clara temporarily, he claimed, and been delayed by circumstances beyond his control. When he'd finally tracked her down, she'd already married another man and turned his child against him. The barn fire was revenge by men he'd had a business dispute with, nothing to do with him. The stagecoach robbery was a desperate act by a man driven to crime by a system that had stolen his family. It was a good performance. Thomas had always been a convincing liar, but Morrison tore it apart on cross-examination, pointing out the inconsistencies, the convenient gaps in memory, the evidence that contradicted every claim. "Mr. Whitmore, you testified that you returned to the stage stop 2 days after leaving your wife there, but the stage driver's logs show no one matching your description in that area for 3 weeks. How do you explain that?" "The driver was mistaken. Or you're lying." Morrison produced the boarding house records from Tucson. "You stayed here 2 weeks after abandoning your wife, telling the proprietor you were heading to California to start fresh. No mention of a wife, no mention of going back for anyone. How do you explain that? I was protecting her privacy.
By pretending she didn't exist? Morrison's voice dripped with contempt.
Mr. Whitmore, you've lied consistently throughout this trial. You lied to your wife. You lied to the court during the custody hearing. And you're lying now. The truth is simple. You abandoned a pregnant woman because she became inconvenient. You only came back when your pride was wounded. And when you couldn't get what you wanted legally, you turned to crime. Thomas's face went purple with rage. That woman destroyed my life. She had no right. She had every right to survive, every right to protect her child, every right to build a new life when you discarded her. Morrison turned to the jury. The evidence is clear. Thomas Whitmore is a criminal, a liar, a man who hired arsonists to terrorize a family out of spite, and a robber who killed an innocent man during a holdup. The law demands justice. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. On the charge of armed robbery of a U.S. mail stagecoach, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of murder during the commission of a felony, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of arson, we find the defendant guilty. 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 Each word landed like a hammer blow. Thomas surged to his feet, shouting, "This is wrong! That woman poisoned you all against me! She's a liar and a—" The marshal grabbed him, forcing him back into his seat. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. "Mr. Whitmore, you've been found guilty on all counts. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison to be served in the territorial penitentiary. You will have no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. The judge's voice was cold. Your crimes show a pattern of selfish, destructive behavior. You abandoned your responsibilities, then lashed out at those who dared to move on without you. Society will be safer with you behind bars." Thomas was still shouting as they led him away, but Clara couldn't hear the words over the rushing in her ears. It was done. Really, truly done. Ethan pulled her close, and Emma was there too, and they stood together while the courtroom emptied around them. "It's over," Ethan said. "He can't hurt us anymore." Clara nodded, but she couldn't speak. The relief was too big, too overwhelming. She'd been carrying the weight of Thomas Whitmore for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright without it. They walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. The world looked different somehow, sharper, more vivid, as if someone had lifted a gray veil Clara hadn't realized was there.
"Mama?"
Emma touched her arm.
"Are you all right?"
Clara looked at this brave girl who called her mama, and at Ethan who'd stood beside her through everything, and felt something break open in her chest. "Yes," she said, and started to cry. Not sad tears, but the kind that came from too much emotion with nowhere else to go. "Yes, I'm all right. I'm better than all right." Ethan held her while she cried, right there on the courthouse steps, and Emma held her too, and they probably looked ridiculous, but Clara didn't care. She'd spent so long being strong, being careful, guarding herself against the next blow. It was a relief beyond measure to finally let go. The ride home was quiet, but peaceful. Emma dozed against Clara's shoulder. Ethan drove the wagon with one hand, the other resting on Clara's knee. The familiar landscape rolled past, desert and scrub, the distant mountains, the endless sky. When they arrived at the ranch, James and Lily ran out to meet them, followed by the neighbor woman carrying Hope. Clara scooped up her daughter, breathing in her baby smell, feeling the solid weight of her. "Was the bad man punished?" James asked seriously. "Yes, sweetheart. He's going to prison for a very long time." "Good. He was mean to you." Clara ruffled his hair. "Yes, he was, but he can't be mean to anyone anymore." That night, after the children were in bed and the neighbor had gone home, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch in their customary spots. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by any town lights for miles. "I keep waiting to feel different," Clara said, "now that it's really over. But I just feel tired. You've been running on fear and determination for months. Now that you can stop, your body's realizing how exhausted it is. Is this what normal feels like? This strange, quiet calm?" Ethan smiled. "I think so, though I'm not sure either of us has had much normal in our lives." Clara laughed softly. "That's true." She was quiet for a moment. Ethan, I need to ask you something. All right. When we got married, it was for practical reasons. Protection, help with the ranch, a business arrangement, more or less. I remember. And we agreed it didn't have to be more than that we were using each other, and that was fine. Ethan turned to look at her, his expression careful. Yes. Clara took a deep breath. I don't want that anymore. The words hung between them in the cooling night air. Ethan was very still. What do you want? I want... Clara struggled to find the right words. When I married Thomas, I thought I was in love. But I was really just desperate to escape my father's house. I mistook need for love. And when Thomas left me, I swore I'd never make that mistake again. That I'd never let myself be that vulnerable. Clara, let me finish. She turned to face him fully. These past months, working beside you, raising the children together, facing Thomas together, I've learned what real partnership looks like. What it means to have someone who doesn't just say they'll stand beside you, but actually does it, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Ethan's hand found hers. I would do anything for you. You know that. I do know that. And that's what scares me. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being a convenient arrangement and became... She paused, gathering courage. It became real. You became real to me. Not just as a partner or a protector, but as someone I... Her voice cracked. Someone I love. Ethan's breath caught audibly. Say that again. I love you, Ethan Hale. And I don't know when it happened or how, but it's true. You're the best man I've ever known, and I want this marriage to be real. In every way. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. Then he stood, pulling her up with him, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. I love you too, he said against her mouth. I've loved you for months. Since the day you stood up in that courtroom and refused to back down. Maybe even before that. But I didn't want to pressure you, didn't want you to feel obligated. I don't feel obligated. I feel... Clara laughed shakily. I feel like I've finally come home. You are home. We both are. They kissed again, deeper this time, and Clara felt something inside her that had been locked tight for so long finally open. She'd been so afraid of being hurt again, of trusting someone with her heart. But Ethan had proven himself 1,000 times over. He'd earned her trust through action, not just words. What about Sarah? Clara asked when they finally pulled apart. I don't want you to feel like you're betraying her memory. Ethan's expression was tender. Sarah will always be part of my past. She gave me 3 beautiful children and taught me how to love. But she's gone, Clara, and she'd want me to be happy. She'd want the children to have a mother who loved them. He cupped Clara's face gently. She'd want me to love you, and I do, completely. Clara leaned into his touch. I was so angry when I first came here. At Thomas, at the situation, at myself for needing help. I thought accepting your offer made me weak. But you've never been weak a day in your life. I felt weak. I felt like I'd failed at everything. Marriage, independence, even basic survival. Clara shook her head. But you taught me that accepting help isn't weakness. That building something together is stronger than doing it alone. We've built a good life here. We have. And I want to keep building it. With you, for as long as we have. Ethan smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. That sounds like a proposal, Mrs. Hale. Maybe it is. Except we're already married. Then let's make it official. Not legally, that's already done. But in our hearts, a real commitment, a real partnership. And a real marriage, Clara added. In every sense. In every sense, Ethan agreed and kissed her again. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Clara moved her belongings into Ethan's room, their room. It felt momentous and natural all at once, this final step into their shared life. The morning brought laughter and teasing from Emma, who'd noticed the change immediately. It's about time, she said with the knowing air of someone much older. You two have been dancing around each other for months. Emma Rose Hale? That's enough, Ethan said, but he was smiling. Yes, Papa. Emma grinned. But I'm right. James watched this exchange with his usual serious expression, then said, Does this mean we're a real family now? Clara knelt down to his level. We've always been a real family, sweetheart. This just makes it more official. Good. I like being a family. Me too, buddy. Me too. Over the following weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Clara and Ethan learned each other in ways they hadn't before, building intimacy through shared confidences and small daily gestures. Clara told him about her childhood, about her mother's death, and her father's harsh expectations. Ethan talked about Sarah, about their courtship and marriage, about the guilt he still carried for not seeing how sick she was until it was too late. I was so focused on the ranch, he said one night as they lay in bed, on providing, on building something for the future. I didn't see that she was fading right in front of me until it was almost too late. You can't blame yourself for that. Illness is good at hiding. Maybe. But I should have paid more attention, should have made her rest more, gotten the doctor sooner. Ethan's voice was rough with old pain. The last thing she said to me was that I needed to let people in, that I had a habit of keeping everyone at arm's length, even her sometimes. She made me promise I'd try to do better. Clara took his hand. And you did. You let me in, let the children in fully. You became the man she wanted you to be. Because of you. You taught me how. We taught each other. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, building bridges across the wounds of the past. Winter came hard that year, bringing snow that blanketed the ranch in white silence. The new barn held up beautifully against the cold, and the cattle weathered the storms better than expected. Clara taught Emma to knit by the fire while Ethan read to James and Lily. Hope was crawling now, getting into everything, and keeping track of her became a full-time job. One particularly cold evening, Emma set down her knitting and said, "Mama, can I ask you something?" Clara's heart still swelled every time Emma called her that. Of course. Did you love my real mama? The question caught Clara off guard. I never met her, sweetheart, but I love the children she raised, and I love the man she married. So in a way, I suppose I do love her. Emma considered this. I think she would have liked you. You're different, but also the same in important ways. How so? You both work hard and don't complain. You both love us even when we're difficult. And you both make Papa smile in that special way where his whole face changes. Clara glanced at Ethan, who was listening while pretending to focus on the book. His ears were red. Your mama sounds like she was wonderful, Clara said, and I'm honored that you think we're alike. I still miss her, Emma said quietly, but I'm glad we have you. You can have both, you know. You can love your mama's memory and also love me. They're not the same thing, and one doesn't replace the other. Emma nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. That's what Papa says, too. Your Papa's a smart man. I heard that, Ethan called from across the room. You were meant to, Clara shot back, and everyone laughed. These moments of warmth and connection carried them through the harsh winter. When supplies ran low and they were snowed in for days at a time, they made games out of rationing and told stories by candlelight. When cabin fever set in and tempers frayed, they gave each other space and grace. Spring arrived like a promise kept, melting the snow and coaxing green from the brown earth. Clara's garden, expanded again, burst into life. She planted tomatoes and beans and squash, teaching Emma the secrets of making things grow in the difficult desert soil. You have to be patient, Clara explained, showing Emma how to thin the seedlings. And persistent. The land here doesn't give easily. You have to earn every harvest. Like earning trust, Emma said. Clara looked up, surprised. Exactly like that. You taught me that too. That trust isn't something you demand. It's something you build over time. You've become very wise, Emma Hale. I had a good teacher, Emma smiled. 2 good teachers, actually. Mama taught me to be strong. You taught me it's okay to let people help you be strong. Clara hugged her, this girl who'd hated her on sight and now offered such profound acceptance. I love you, Emma. I love you too, Mama. One warm afternoon in late April, Clara was hanging laundry when she saw riders approaching. Instinct made her tense, hand moving toward the rifle that was always nearby now. But as the riders got closer, she recognized them as neighbors, the Johnsons from the next ranch over. Mrs. Johnson dismounted with her usual brisk efficiency. Clara, I hope we're not intruding. Not at all. Would you like some tea? That would be lovely, thank you. Inside, over tea and fresh biscuits, Mrs. Johnson got to the point. I'm organizing a quilting circle, meeting once a week at different homes. I was hoping you'd join us. Clara blinked, surprised. Me? Of course you. You're part of this community, Clara. Have been for over a year now. It's time you were included in everything, not just tolerated on the edges. The words were blunt but kind. Clara felt her throat tighten. I'd like that very much. Good. We meet Thursdays. This week is at my house. Emma's welcome too, if she'd like to learn. After Mrs. Johnson left, Clara stood in the kitchen feeling oddly emotional. She'd been accepted in theory for months now. People were polite, even friendly. But this was different. This was being woven into the fabric of the community, not just acknowledged as existing on its fringes. When she told Ethan that evening, he smiled. I'm glad. You deserve to have friends, to be part of something beyond just the ranch and the children. I have you and the children. That's enough. It's wonderful, but it shouldn't be everything. You need your own life too. Clara thought about that. For so long, her entire identity had been defined by her relationship to men, daughter, wife, mother. The idea of having something that was just hers felt foreign, but also appealing. She started attending the quilting circle, and through it formed real friendships with the other women. They shared recipes and gossip, and the small intimacies of daily life. They supported each other through births and deaths and the 100 small crises that frontier life brought. One of the women, Sarah, the younger one who shared a name with Ethan's first wife, became particularly close to Clara. She was pregnant with her first child and nervous about it. What if something goes wrong? She asked Clara one afternoon. What if I'm not strong enough? Clara took her hand. You're stronger than you know, and you don't have to do it alone. That's what community is for. We help each other through. Like how everyone helped you when you first arrived? Yes, though it took me a long time to accept that help. I was so determined to do everything myself, to prove I didn't need anyone. What changed? Clara thought about that. I learned that needing people isn't weakness. It's just being human. We're meant to help each other. That's how we survive out here. When Sarah went into labor 2 months later, Clara was one of the women who attended her. She held Sarah's hand through the contractions, wiped her face with cool cloths, and talked her through the fear. When the baby finally came, a healthy boy, Sarah looked at Clara with exhausted gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. I couldn't have done that without you. Yes, you could have, but you didn't have to. That's the point. The seasons turned. Summer brought brutal heat and hard work in the fields. Fall brought harvest and the satisfaction of full root cellars. Winter came again, easier this time because they knew what to expect and had prepared accordingly. Hope celebrated her second birthday with a small party that felt momentous. She was walking now, talking in short sentences, showing flashes of the personality she'd have as she grew. She had Clara's determination and Ethan's calm steadiness, and she adored her older siblings with an intensity that sometimes overwhelmed them. Hope, James would protest when she grabbed his toys. You can't just take things. Mine, Hope would insist, clutching whatever she'd appropriated. She's like a tiny tyrant, Emma observed. She's 2, Clara said. Give her time. She'll learn to share. When? Eventually, Emma laughed. That's what you said about James learning to tie his shoes. And he did, eventually. You're very patient, Mama. I have to be. I'm raising 4 children who are all determined to test me. Only 4? Emma's eyes sparkled with mischief. What about Papa? He can be pretty stubborn too. Clara threw a dishcloth at her, and Emma dodged, laughing. These ordinary moments of family life were precious to Clara in a way she couldn't quite articulate. After so much fear and uncertainty, there was profound joy in the mundane. In arguments about chores and negotiations about bedtime, in scraped knees and hurt feelings, and the 1,000 small dramas that made up childhood. She'd wanted to survive. She'd survived. But somewhere along the way, she'd also learned to live. One spring evening, 2 years after Thomas's conviction, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The realization came with mixed feelings, joy at the prospect of another child, but also fear. Her pregnancy with Hope had been marked by abandonment and terror. The idea of going through it again brought back memories she'd rather forget. She told Ethan that night, after the children were in bed, His reaction was immediate and wholehearted joy.
That's wonderful. He pulled her into his arms. We're going to have a baby. You're not worried?
Worried? Why would I be worried? Last time I was pregnant, everything was terrible. Thomas, the abandonment, the fear. Clara. Ethan pulled back to look at her. This time is completely different. You're not alone. You're not afraid. You're home, with people who love you, and we're going to welcome this baby together. Clara wanted to believe him, but the old fears had deep roots.
What if something goes wrong? Then we'll handle it, together. Ethan's voice was firm. But nothing's going to go wrong. You're strong and healthy, and this time you'll have proper care. The doctor, the midwife, all the women from the quilting circle. Everyone will help. You make it sound easy. It won't be easy. Having babies never is. But it won't be what it was with Hope. I promise you that. Over the following months, Clara discovered Ethan was right. This pregnancy was different in every way. She had help with the heavy work. The doctor visited regularly to check on her. The women from the quilting circle offered advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, and the kind of casual support that made all the difference. Emma was excited about the prospect of a new sibling. I'm old enough to really help this time, she said. I was too young when Hope was born, but now I can do more. You were a tremendous help when Hope was born, Clara reminded her. You kept me calm and brought me everything I needed. I was terrified. You were brave. There's a difference. Emma smiled. I learned that from you. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and by the time autumn arrived, Clara was large and uncomfortable but healthy. The baby was due in November, and everyone on the ranch was preparing. Ethan fixed up the small room off the kitchen to be a nursery. Emma and Lily sewed baby blankets. James carved a small wooden horse as a gift for his new sibling. When the pain started one cold November morning, Clara was ready. Ethan sent James for the midwife while Emma stayed with Clara, holding her hand and talking her through the contractions with surprising competence for a 13-year-old. You're doing great, Mama, Emma said. Just breathe like you taught me when Lily cut her hand last month. Slow and steady. Clara laughed despite the pain. That was different. Pain is pain. Breathing helps either way. The midwife arrived, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who'd delivered half the babies in the territory. She examined Clara, pronounced everything normal, and settled in to wait. The labor was long, but not difficult. As evening fell and the first stars appeared, Clara gave birth to a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and powerful lungs. He's perfect, Ethan said, tears streaming down his face as he held his son. Clara, he's perfect. Clara, exhausted but elated, smiled. What should we name him? They'd discussed names but never settled on one. Now looking at this small person they'd created together, only one name felt right. Daniel, Ethan said, after my grandfather, a good man who taught me that family is built through choice and commitment, not just blood. Daniel Hale, Clara tested the name. I like it. Emma was allowed in to meet her new brother, followed by James and Lily. Even Hope, now nearly 3, was brought in to see the baby, though she seemed more interested in the blankets than the infant. He's little, James observed. You were little once, too, Clara reminded him. Was I that red? Redder. James giggled, and the sound filled Clara's heart to bursting. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Clara nursed Daniel while Ethan sat beside her. The lamp cast soft light across the room, and outside the desert night was peaceful. We have 4 children, Clara said wonderingly. 4. We do, and they're all ours, all chosen. Clara thought about that. Emma, James, and Lily. Sarah's children, who'd become hers through love and time. Hope, who'd been born from Clara's worst mistake but had become her greatest joy. And now Daniel, created from the love she'd found with Ethan. I never imagined this, she said. When I was standing at that stage stop, pregnant and alone, I couldn't have imagined any of this. What did you imagine? Death, honestly, or at best a life of grinding poverty and shame. I certainly didn't imagine a home full of children and laughter, didn't imagine friends or community or love. Ethan kissed her temple. Life has a way of surprising us. It does. Clara looked down at Daniel's small face. I'm grateful for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led me here.
I'm grateful too. For you. For the family we've built. Ethan's arm tightened around her shoulders. You saved me, Clara. Saved all of us. We saved each other. Yes, we did. The years that followed were full and rich. Daniel grew into a sturdy boy with Ethan's calm temperament and Clara's determination. Emma married at 19 to a good man from a neighboring ranch, and her wedding was the social event of the season. James, quieter than his siblings, found his calling in ranching and gradually took over more of the day-to-day operations as Ethan aged. Lily remained sunny and optimistic, bringing joy wherever she went. Hope grew into a bright, fierce girl who looked so much like Clara it was startling, and who adored Ethan with complete devotion. When Hope was 7, she came to Clara with questions. "Mama, why don't I look like Papa?" Clara had been expecting this. She sat Hope down and told her an edited version of the truth. "Before I married Papa, I was married to someone else, a man who wasn't kind. When I was going to have you, that man left me alone in the desert. Papa found me and saved us both. He chose to be your father when your birth father couldn't be." Hope absorbed this solemnly. "So Papa's not my real father?" "He's your real father in every way that matters. He was there when you were born. He's the one who feeds you and teaches you and tucks you in at night. That makes him your real father." "What about the other man?" "He's gone. He made bad choices and ended up in prison. He can't hurt us anymore." "Good." Hope seemed satisfied with this explanation. "I'm glad Papa chose me. We all are, sweetheart. You're the best thing that ever happened to this family." Hope hugged her fiercely. "I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby girl." When Hope was 10, a letter arrived from the territorial prison. Thomas Whitmore had died of pneumonia. Clara read the notice once, felt nothing, and burned the letter in the stove. That chapter of her life was closed. Had been closed for years. The ranch continued to prosper. Ethan's careful management and Clara's fierce determination to make their home beautiful and productive paid off in steady growth. They bought more land, hired help during busy seasons, and became known throughout the territory as fair employers and good neighbors. Clara's quilting circle became a cornerstone of the community, and through it she helped dozens of women navigate pregnancy, childbirth, and the challenges of frontier life. She became known as someone who'd survived the worst and built something beautiful from it, and other women sought her counsel. One young woman, recently widowed and pregnant, came to Clara in tears. "I don't know what to do. I have no money, no family, nowhere to go." Clara held her and said, "You'll survive this. I know it feels impossible right now, but you're stronger than you think, and you're not alone. We'll help you." And they did. The community rallied, just as they'd rallied for Clara years before. The woman found work, had her baby in safety, and eventually rebuilt her life. Years later, she told Clara, "You saved me." "No," Clara said. "You saved yourself. I just showed you it was possible, son." On Clara and Ethan's 15th wedding anniversary, he took her back to the stage stop where they'd met. It was completely abandoned now. The building collapsed into weathered boards and memories. Clara stood where she'd stood that desperate day, but she felt no pain looking at it, only gratitude for the path that had led her here. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked. "That I was so scared that day, so certain my life was over. I couldn't see past the next hour, much less imagine a future. And now?" Clara turned to him, this man who'd given her a chance when she'd needed it most, who'd stood beside her through every trial, who'd loved her children, all of them, as his own, who'd built a life with her that was richer than anything she could have imagined. "Now I can't imagine any other life but this one." Ethan pulled her close. "Neither can I." They stood there together, two people who'd found each other in the desert and built something beautiful from desperation and necessity and, eventually, love. The stage stop was gone, reclaimed by the desert that had tried to kill Clara all those years ago. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd thrived. She'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into the best life she could have imagined. She'd learned that family wasn't just blood. It was choice and commitment and showing up day after day, even when it was hard. She'd learned that love wasn't just grand gestures and poetry. It was quiet moments on the porch. It was hands held across the table. It was standing together against the darkness and trusting each other to be there when morning came. She'd learned that home wasn't a place. It was people. The ones who chose you and whom you chose in return. Clara Hale, no longer Whitmore, never again defined by the man who'd discarded her, stood with her husband in the desert and felt the weight of the past finally lift completely. She'd survived. She'd fought. She'd built something beautiful. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Sonnet 84.95.